Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome to yet another episode on Little's Law YouTube channel. Today in this video, we will see about another controller that we use in JMeter, and also we will see the differences between the controller. So today we are going to see about the Interleave controller. So we will see how potentially we can utilize or we can use this Interleave controller. And also we'll have some demo and examples on the interleave controller. And also we'll see the differences between the interleave controller and the various other logic controllers. So before we dive into the video, I request you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Little's Law. If you have not subscribed yet, please like my videos, share my video with your friends, and comment your questions and your feedback in the comment section. So with no delays, we will go to the video now. So today we are going to see about the interleave controller. So let's see how to add a interleave controller. So we have a test plan here and I'm adding a thread group, and under the thread group we will add the interleave controller. So to add the interleave controller, we'll have to right click on the thread group, go to add and the logic controller, and then we have the interleave controller, which is next to the include controller. So we have added the interleave controller. Now we'll add few HTTP requests and see how do they work. So I'm adding some HTTP requests here under the sampler, and let us change the name for this request, which is request number 1, and we'll add another request as request number 2, and we'll add one more request, which is request number 3. And on top of all this, we'll add a results tree, the view results tree, to see how does these requests work. So to do that, let's right click on the thread group, go to add the listener and then the view results tree. So now we have the view results tree. So while we execute, we can see in what order do the interleave controller works. So before that, we'll see the parameters that are in interleave controller. So we have our interleave controller here, and we have 4 parameters. The first one is the name. So we can change the name of the controller here. So we have interleave controller. We can even change it to Little's Law interleave controller. And then we have the comment section in case if we use multiple controllers and to identify or to know what is the purpose of this interleave controller here, we can add some comments as well. And now we have 2 other parameters. One is the ignore sub controller blocks. So what if we check, or what if we uncheck it? What does happen? So if we check the ignore sub controller blocks option, the interleave controller, that is this interleave controller that we have here, will treat the sub controllers like single request element, and it allows only one request per controller at a time. So we'll see that in our next example, and we'll see how does it work. And then we have the next parameter, which is interleave across threads. So if we check this, the interleave controller, that is the controller we have here, this interleave controller will alternate among each of its children controllers for each loop iteration, but across all threads. Say for example, if in a configuration with 4 threads and 3 child controllers, on first iteration, the thread 1 will run first child, the thread 2 the second child, the thread 3 the third child, the thread 4 the fourth first child, On next iteration, each thread will run the following child controller. So we'll see that in a demo here, that what is the level of the interleave controller utilizes the requests which are under them. So for now, we have one thread with one loop count, and let's run the request, or let's run this thread group and see how does this interleave controller works. So let me run the script. Let us make a few changes here. Quick change to make sure that every request works fine. So let's run the test again. So now here we can see that the first request, that is a request number 1, has got executed since we have one thread with one loop count, and here we have 3 requests. So let's now run with two loop, and let's see how does it work. So we have one thread and 2 loop, so 2 iterations. Let's see how does it work and what are the requests that are getting executed. So in any test here that we run, so it always, with one user, it always run with in the sequential order. So that's the reason we could always get the first request and the second request in the order. So let's now move it to 3 requests, and here we can see the request 1 has executed first, and the request 2 and the request 3. So this works in a top to bottom order in a sequential way, and that's the reason we could see the execution of the interleave controller starts from the request 1 and then the 2 and then the 3. So now we'll increase the loop count. Say for example, if we are increasing it to 5, and let's see what happens. And let's re-execute the test now. So here we can see, as I already mentioned, so they work in a top to bottom order in a sequential manner. So it started with request 1, and then it executed request 2, and then request 3, and again it goes back to the top, and it started with request 1 and request 2. So this is how the test executes, or the interleave controller executes the request. So now let's make a change. Since we have this parameter which is the interleave across threads, so let's now make a change. So we'll introduce 2 users with 2 threads, or 2 thread group, which is 2 users with 2 iterations. And let's now see, let's now uncheck this and let's see how does it work. So here we can see for the first user, we could see the request 1, and for the first user it is request 2, and then again second user it is request 1, and second user it is request 2. Since we have added a ramp up period of 1 second, so automatically there is a 1 second difference between each user. So now let's make a quick change. We will make it to 3 so that we can see whether all the requests gets executed. So now I'm running the test. So here we could see the first user executes the request from 1 to 3, and the same way the second user executes the test from 1 to 3. So this is how the interleave controller executes when we uncheck the interleave across threads. So let us make another quick test. So we will increase the thread group. So we'll make it to 5, and let's run the test and see in what manner, in what sequential order they execute. So here we could see that is 2 multiplied by 5 is 10 requests. So here we could see that the requests have got executed in a sequential manner, but again the request 3 is missing with the second user. So the first user has executed the 3 requests, and the second user has executed 2 requests, and again the first user has executed 3 requests and the second user has executed 2 requests. So this is how the interleave controller iterates between the users. So let's make another change. So now I'm choosing this interleave across threads, and without any change, we will run the same test and see how does this work. So I'm clearing this now. So here, just to remember, so here we could see the first user has executed the first 3 requests, and the second user has requested first two requests, and again the first user has requested the first 3 requests, and then it is first second. So now we'll clear it and we'll see in what manner or in what order do they execute. So here we could see a mix of transactions. That is, it started with request 1, 2, 3, and then it started with 1, 2, again 2, and then 3, and again it started with 1, it continues with 1, 2, and 3. So when we choose this interleave across threads, and when we have the users, when we have more number of users, so this is how it works. So let's make another change. So we'll increase the thread group to 3 and the loop count to 3, and let's see how does this work. So this will give us more idea on how this interleave controller takes control of the requests. So here we could see it starts with 1, 2, 3, and then for the next user it starts with 2, 3, 1 and 3, 1, 2. So this is how the interleave across threads works. So let's remove this and see how does this work. So here we could see that there is a mix of transactions. So let me again, without clearing this, let me run again so that we can see a comparison. So here we can see that in the sequential order they have been executed, that is 1, 2, 3, and then the second user starts with 1, 2, and 3, and again the third user with 1, 2, and 3. So that is the level of difference that this particular option makes. That is, if we choose this interleave across threads, automatically across threads the interleave controller takes control of the request, and they gets generated, or they get hit randomly in a way that they choose any request. But when we uncheck this, automatically they work in a sequential order from top to bottom, and that's the difference between this interleave across threads checked and unchecked. So here we can see that when we use more number of threads, automatically there is a mix of transactions when we choose this, and there is a sequential transactions when we uncheck this. And that is how the interleave controller works. So far we have seen about how to use the interleave across threads option. So let's now see the next example with another demo. So let's now watch the second example of having multiple interleave controllers. So we have one parent interleave controller and we have multiple child interleave controllers. So we have two child interleave controllers under a parent interleave controller. And we have two requests for each of these interleave controllers. And then we have one interleaved request at the end of the interleaved controller. So no matter what we execute, this interleaved controller will get executed when we run the thread group. So let's now see this with few examples. So for now, I'm having one user with one thread group, which is one iteration, and let's see how does it execute. So when we run this first iteration, that is one user with one iteration, we could see the home page in the first child interleave controller executes, and then the interleaved request gets executed. So let's now make a change. We'll increase this loop count to 2 so that this interleave gets executed the second time. Let's now execute it and see how does it work. So now here we can see the home page, which is in the first child interleave controller, gets executed. and then the interleaved, which is outside the interleave controller, and then the bug page, which is in the second child interleave controller, and again the interleaved. So this is how it executes since we have given two loop count. So let me increase it to 3 and let's see how does it work. So here we can see that the first child controller, interleave controller. So we have got the home page that has got executed, and then the interleaved, which is the outside request, and then the bug page, which is in the second child interleave controller, and then the CVS page, which is in the first child interleave controller. So this is how the interleave controller works when it is inside multiple, when it is with multiple child controllers. So we have 4 requests. So let me increase this to 4 and let's see how does this work. So now we can see all the child requests under the child interleave controller has got executed. So let's now make a small change. So we will select this ignore subcontroller blocks and see how does this same test works. So without clearing this, I'm running it so that you can have a comparison. So here we could see there is no much change. So even after selecting the ignore subcontroller blocks, again the execution is happening the same way. So let's now make a quick change. So we will increase the thread group to 2 and we will decrease the loop count to 2, and let's see how does this work, in what manner do they execute. So we can easily see here that the home page, which is in the first child interleave controller, has got executed, and then the interleaved, which is the common HTTP request, and then the bug page, and then the interleaved. So in this order, this is the order which the interleave controller gets executed. So let's make a quick change. So we will enable this interactive interleave across threads and we will see how does this same setup works. Let me clear this and we'll run a test. And here we could see when we choose the option of interleave across threads, so automatically we could see a mix of transactions that has got executed. That is, usually it goes with, let's run it again and we'll have a comparison. So without clearing it, I will run this test. So here we can see the home page, and here we could see the home page and the bug page, and then the interleaved, and then the bug page, home page, and interleaved and interleaved. So we could see a mix of transactions which does not execute in the sequential order if we select this interleave across threads. So this is the difference between this checking and unchecking, and also by choosing the ignore checking and unchecking ignore subcontroller blocks. So this is how it normally executes. So we'll just have a quick recap. So this interleave controller executes the requests sequentially in the top to bottom order, and when we have, and again we have two options, which is ignore subcontroller blocks and interactive interleave across threads. So interleave across threads will pick up the threads or pick up the requests between multiple threads, so they don't come in a sequential order. Instead it chooses the requests and they execute them. So when we choose this interleave across threads with multiple users, they normally don't follow the sequential order. So that is the difference between choosing, that is checking and unchecking this interleave across threads. So let's now see a quick difference between the interleave controller and the simple controller. So what we'll do is we will duplicate this interleave controller and we'll change this controller so that we don't need to make any differences or any changes in the request. So I'm changing this to simple controller, and under the thread group I'm changing the thread to 1, so which is one user will be doing one iteration. And let's change the name here. So this is going to be a simple controller. So we have the same set of requests. So we have the same set of requests, which is what we have in the interleave controller. So we have, let's change the name so that you can easily understand. So I'm making it as IC, which is interleave controller, and I'll copy this to the other requests. And for the simple controller, I will add the name to simple underscore so that we can easily identify which requests belong to which controller. So far we have 3 requests under interleave controller and 3 requests, the same request under the simple controller. And let's do an execution. So we have one thread with one user. So I'm starting the test now. Let me clear it and run once again. So I'm starting the test now. So here we could see under interleave controller, we could see only one request, which is the first request, has got processed. But under the simple controller, all the request is getting processed. So that is the difference between the interleave controller and any other controller, which is if we have the interleave controller, it starts from the top to bottom order in a sequential manner. So let's make a change. So what we'll do is we will have the same one user thread, but we will run it twice and let's see how does it work. So here we could see in the first iteration or the first loop, we have got the first request from the interleave controller, and under the second iteration, we have got the second request. But for the simple controller, all the requests have got processed. So based on our business scenario and business requirement, we can effectively use the interleave controller. Let me make another change. I will bring in another controller. We will add the loop controller here. We have one loop and let's try it. Let's see how does this work, because this will bring us a difference and bring an understanding of how different controllers work. So here again, we could see since we have one user with 2 threads, again the same case. So we could see that under the interleave controller, it's only one request each time, but for the other controllers, it is, so here it is loop controller. So for the other requests, it executes all the requests at a time. So let's make a change. So in our previous video, we saw about once only controller. So now I'm changing it to once only controller. And let's see how does this once only controller works. And let's see the difference between the interleave and the once only controller. Let me change the name as well. So it will be once only controller. I'm just prefixing it. And let's do a quick execution and see how does this work. So I'm running the test now. So here we could see, since it is a once only controller, yeah, it executes only once, even though we have 2 iterations. But the interleave controller has got executed twice with each of its requests. Let us change this to 3 and see how does this work. So let's do a quick check. So I'm running the test again. And here we could see the interleave controller has got executed for the first time with the request 1, and then the once only controller. So they get executed only once with all their requests. and then again it went back to the interleave controller for the second iteration, and then it went back to the interleave controller for the third iteration. So that's the difference between the interleave controller and the other control. So that is the difference between the interleave controller and the various other controllers we have seen. I believe this video would have been very useful to you. Please do follow me for more interesting videos. We'll catch up in another interesting session. Until then, it's bye bye from Vasant Shanmugam and Little Slaw.